Journey through time and uncover the events, people, and civilizations that shaped our world. Welcome to the Vault of History.
Think about the television in your living room, right? When we picture the dawn of TV, most of us probably imagine the 1950s or 60s. You know, that post-war boom where mass media just took over American and British homes. But what if I told you that decades before all of that, the world's first regular TV broadcasts flickered to life somewhere completely different and honestly deeply unexpected? We're talking about 1930s Nazi Germany. It is just a stunning piece of history that completely flips our understanding of broadcast media on its head.
So, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going to objectively look at the source material to figure out the raw mechanics of early broadcast propaganda. We're going to pull back the curtain and see exactly how a totalitarian regime grabbed hold of this brand new, barely functioning technology and tried to mold it into this tool of absolute psychological control.
Okay, so here is our roadmap for how we'll break this down today. Number 1, the 1935 broadcasting launch. 2, the 1936 Olympic breakthrough. 3, cultural features and indoctrination. And finally, number 4, wartime television and adaptation.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the 1935 broadcasting launch, a clunky experiment.
Now, back in 1935, the National Post Office over in Berlin had actually been tinkering with television, but honestly, the quality was terrible. Still, they were in this intense race to beat the UK and the US, so they just pushed this brand new medium onto the airwaves anyway. Looking at this timeline really grounds us, because it shows just how incredibly fast this technology evolved right alongside an escalating global conflict. I mean, we're looking at this super compressed, high-speed evolution over literally just 9 years, from that rush launch in 35 all the way to the screens going completely dark in 1944.
But okay, let's talk about what that 1935 launch actually looked like behind the scenes, because it was wild. It was claustrophobic and absurdly difficult. They didn't have these sweeping, glamorous studios. If you were an announcer, you had to step into this pitch-black, soundproof scanning cell that was barely 2 square meters. It's basically a tiny closet, and because the scanning tech back then was mostly mechanical and couldn't handle any changes in lighting, performers had to slather on this insanely heavy, exaggerated makeup just to get some visual contrast. And the kicker, even after all of that, the camera could still only transmit this fuzzy, flickering image of just your head and shoulders. It was a really flawed, super uncomfortable experiment.
But what's fascinating is the massive disconnect between that clunky, awful tech and the regime's deeply sinister ambition. Despite the picture being barely legible, the Reich broadcasting director, Eugene Hadamovsky, launched the whole thing on March 22, 1935, with this chilling statement. He basically said the sacred mission of this new medium was to plant the image of the Führer in all German hearts. So right from day one, you have to understand, the goal was absolutely never entertainment. It was always psychological infiltration.
Which brings us to Section 2, the 1936 Olympic breakthrough, a global stage. So the regime quickly figured out that, hey, broadcasting fuzzy heads from dark closets isn't really going to captivate the masses, right? They needed a catalyst to innovate. And the 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin, that was the perfect excuse for a massive tech upgrade. Get this, in just over a year, they transitioned from those blind, pitch-black 2-meter rooms to state-of-the-art electronic cameras. Instead of playing fuzzy pre-recorded films, they were suddenly pulling off live cable transmissions outside in broad daylight. That jump from mechanical to electronic scanning was a total game changer and exactly what the regime needed to flex its power on a global stage.
And here is the really crucial number, 160,000. That's how many people watched the 1936 Olympics live. Now, to be clear, they weren't chilling on their couches at home. The regime actually built specially designed television parlors all over the city. You had people packed shoulder to shoulder in these communal viewing rooms, completely glued to the screens, watching live sports for the very first time in human history. This was the moment TV really broke through to the general public.
Naturally, the programming pumped into those parlors was incredibly calculated. It was not just about the sports. The television troupe broadcast these beautifully curated tours of the pristine, brand-new Olympic Village. They did charming little interviews with foreign athletes, including American basketball players and weightlifters, basically just asking them how much they loved the amazing facilities. They showed off these massive, fully stocked dining halls to project this image of immense wealth and stability. The whole thing was a carefully crafted illusion of a welcoming, perfectly organized society, beamed directly to both domestic viewers and international visitors.
All right, moving on to Section 3, cultural features and indoctrination, the mundane versus the sinister.
So after the Olympics packed up, the cameras needed something new to shoot. The TV troupe started cranking out daily cultural features for those television parlors. And honestly, the viewing experience was incredibly jarring. Like, if you were sitting in a parlor on a random Tuesday, you'd be watching the most mundane, almost goofy entertainment. We're talking lasso step dancers, quaint little cooking shows about how to pickle pumpkins, or a documentary on retraining men to be women's hairdressers. But, and here's where it gets so dark, right next to that, in the exact same lineup, was deeply sinister indoctrination. They literally broadcast anthropological skull measurements being done on a 13-year-old girl to check her quote-unquote racial purity. They aired tours of aggressive anti-Bolshevik and anti-Semitic exhibitions. It was this terrifying normalization of extreme ideology, just casually sandwiched right next to pumpkin recipes.
And this obsession with order and scale definitely carried over to their coverage of the massive Nazi Party congresses. By 1937, they are using those electronic cameras to broadcast the Nuremberg rallies live. But what's fascinating is the reporters didn't just point the camera at marching troops. No, they spent endless amounts of time listing off the staggering logistics needed to feed 1 million attendees. They proudly announced that it took 60 train wagons of potatoes, 60 wagons of bread, and 42 wagons of meat. Why emphasize all that food? Because projecting an image of absolute logistical power and flawless organization was just a massive core pillar of their propaganda strategy.
Okay, let's get into our final section, number 4. Wartime television and adaptation, the illusion crumbles.
In 1939, World War II breaks out, and suddenly this medium has to radically shift gears all over again. That carefully polished peacetime illusion just crashed right into harsh reality. At first, the regime tried using TV purely as a tool for military morale and escapism. Since their tiny Berlin studios were way too small for the giant variety shows they suddenly wanted to produce, they packed up and moved operations into a massive 2,000-seat amphitheater near the Olympic Stadium, tapping into the cable lines they laid years earlier. They put on these huge entertainment reviews just to distract the soldiers. They even went so far as to set up a dedicated TV station in occupied Paris, mostly to broadcast light entertainment and keep the occupying soldiers from, as the source material literally puts it, loitering around the city. But as the war dragged on, that glossy propaganda was completely shattered. Allied bombing raids started heavily damaging the broadcasting stations. Those lavish cooking shows? Totally gone, replaced by really grim survival programs. There's this one striking broadcast from 1943 where the cameras show a major urban roundabout in Berlin, Alexanderplatz. But there are no pristine lawns anymore. The whole roundabout has been ripped up and turned into a vegetable garden to grow turnips for a starving population. The programming literally had to pivot from grand, flashy entertainment to desperate, basic survival. And this right here perfectly and tragically captures their final, desperate use of television. As casualties mounted to just horrific levels, the TV troupe was ordered to somehow maintain this illusion of invincibility. So they started broadcasting segments featuring severely disabled veterans, like double amputees returning from the Eastern Front. But the propaganda machine still insisted on projecting strength, so they actually showed these amputees navigating complex obstacle courses and even dancing. The slogan on the screen read, "Joy and will master fate." It was just this incredibly tragic, forced performance of resilience, totally designed to hide a collapsing war effort. But of course, an illusion like that can only hold up for so long. By the autumn of 1944, as the country's infrastructure completely collapsed, the power was finally cut. The world's first regular television signal went permanently dark. The whole bizarre experiment that had started in a pitch-black 2-square-meter cell was finally over.
So, as we look back at all of these source materials, it really leaves us with something critical to reflect on. We've just traced how a brand new, totally clunky piece of technology was weaponized at lightning speed in just 9 years to curate reality, normalize absolute extremes, and distract an entire nation. So the question we really need to ask ourselves today is this. If they could do all of that with fuzzy mechanical screens and cable lines back in 1935, how vulnerable are we to the seamless, hyper-targeted mass media innovations of today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those hard questions about the media you consume, and I'll catch you next time.
History never ends. It only continues through time. Thank you for watching The Vault of History.